Imagine what you would do if you had the chance to save a child's life, but that decision meant risking everything. Your career, your trust, and even your own freedom. That's exactly what Gabriela did, but the price was higher than she could ever have imagined. Henry West, a successful billionaire, watched as his 3-month-old daughter Clara was diagnosed with a rare and fatal disease. Medicine offered no more hope. Desperate, he entrusted his daughter's life to her nanny Gabriela, who, with unconditional love, decided to act. But in secret. She knew that if Henry found out, he would never allow it. And it was this risky, desperate decision that would change Clara's fate, but also break a father's trust. However, no one could have predicted what would happen next. What Gabriela did not only defied logic but also the very concept of love, sacrifice, and forgiveness. And when the secret was revealed, Henry couldn't hold back his tears. But what really happened? How did a simple nanny manage to save the life of a millionaire's child and change everything forever? Get ready for a story full of emotion, twists, and a profound lesson about what really matters in life. Now let's discover how the secret of a nanny left a millionaire father in tears. Henry West, a successful billionaire in the business world, never imagined that his greatest challenge in life would come not from a negotiation or a market crisis. When his daughter Clara was born, all his dreams seemed to finally come true. But at 3 months old, the joy he felt was shattered by devastating news. The doctors, with their serious faces and grave tone, told him that Clara had a rare and incurable disease. Hope was scarce, with the prognosis giving her only a few months to live. Henry was paralyzed. The pain was unbearable. He, who had worked so hard to achieve everything, couldn't save his own daughter. The doctor's words echoed in his mind. "There's little we can do. All that's left is time." Desperate, he returned to the mansion where Clara was, his life reduced to a series of feelings of helplessness and regret. While he pondered his options, his wife was in another room, immersed in a silent pain he couldn't understand. It was as if the world around him had lost its colors, except for Clara's innocent gaze, staring at him with her large blue eyes, unaware of the storm approaching. It was then that he remembered Gabriela, the nanny who had cared for Clara since she was born. Gabriela was a quiet woman, but deeply loving. Henry had always trusted her. She had become more than just an employee. She was almost an extension of his own family. If anyone could give Clara the love and care she needed during these difficult times, it would be her. When he decided, Henry sought her out, hopeful that she could offer some comfort or perhaps an unexpected solution. But deep down, he knew there were no easy answers. All that was left was to wait. However, there was something about Gabriela that gave him a sense of security. Maybe it was the fact that she was a woman of great responsibility, with a kind heart and a unique ability to calm others. She had always been more than a nanny. She was a silent protector. Gabriela cared for Clara with immeasurable affection. Every gesture she made was filled with a calmness that Henry could no longer feel. When she was near Clara, everything seemed to fall into silence, as if time, for a brief moment, stopped. Gabriela had managed to establish a routine that comforted Clara, but also nourished the little hope that still remained in Henry's heart. He, who was constantly in the office or involved in meetings, found himself drawn to the moments when Clara and Gabriela were together. He couldn't explain it, but something in the way she devoted herself to caring for his daughter seemed to transcend any logical explanation. Clara, who once seemed so fragile and distant, now smiled more often, and her health, which should have been deteriorating, seemed to slowly improve. Henry decided that he would seek out every possible option. He began contacting specialists and doctors from all over the world, but with every new test, the reality didn't change. Clara was dying. The pain of watching his daughter fight for her life while being powerless to do anything was an endless agony. But Gabriela didn't seem as desperate as he did. For weeks, she continued to care for Clara with silent devotion, and Henry noticed that she was doing something more, something he couldn't understand. It wasn't just the usual care. She was doing something in secret. Something he couldn't see, but somehow felt was happening. One night, as he quietly entered the room where Clara was sleeping, Henry saw Gabriela standing beside Clara's bed. She was whispering soft words to Clara, while her hands touched the girl's forehead with an almost supernatural gentleness. It was a moment of deep intimacy, but at the same time, Henry realized that something else was happening. He felt a wave of unease, but at the same time, a small spark of hope. He knew that Gabriela wasn't just taking care of Clara. She was doing something more. Something he couldn't yet comprehend. Henry couldn't stop thinking about Gabriela's actions. Over the following days, he found himself silently observing her more and more. Something in her posture was different, more focused, as if she knew something he didn't. Clara seemed stronger, with a vitality that even surprised the doctors. However, Henry couldn't ignore the growing feeling that something was off. He began to question himself, what is she doing differently? Why is Clara, who should be worsening, getting better? When Gabriela entered one of the rooms with Clara, Henry decided to follow her discreetly. He approached the door and from a distance, observed the scene. Gabriela was gently caressing Clara's face while whispering soft words, but there was something more in her hands. Henry couldn't see clearly, but he felt that she was doing something he hadn't authorized. The protective instinct of a father rose within him. The next morning, he confronted her, with a slight tension in his voice. Gabriela, I need to know what's going on with Clara. What have you been doing in secret? Gabriela, although appearing calm, hesitated slightly before answering. She looked at him with an expression of patience, as if she had been expecting him to ask, but hesitated to give the answer. I'm doing what I believe is best for Clara, Mr. West. I just want to see her well. Henry, although concerned, didn't press further. He knew Gabriela had always been loyal and careful. However, the discomfort remained within him. Something was happening, but he didn't know exactly what. The answers Gabriela was giving didn't seem satisfactory, and the feeling that something extraordinary was at stake unsettled him. Gabriela, in turn, knew that she was risking everything. Not just her position in the house, but her life as well. She had stumbled upon research about an experimental treatment that could save Clara's life. The more traditional doctors had advised against any attempt at alternative treatments, but Gabriela, driven by a deep maternal instinct, could not surrender to helplessness. She knew Henry would never allow her to try this type of treatment. So she made the decision to go ahead on her own. Using the knowledge she had acquired over years of research and contact with obscure specialists, she obtained a sample of an experimental substance that, according to preliminary studies, could alter the child's genetics and, theoretically, reverse the rare disease. Without Henry knowing, she began administering the secret treatment to Clara. She knew that if she were caught, she could be fired, or even sued, but what truly mattered was Clara's life. 4 whole nights, she prepared the solution and carefully administered it, without anyone knowing. It was an immense risk, but Gabriela believed the little girl deserved a chance. Each day, Clara showed signs that the treatment was working. Her eyes lit up in a way Henry had never seen before, and she began to smile more frequently. Even with the visible improvement, Gabriela continued her act as if nothing extraordinary was happening. She knew she couldn't let Henry find out what she was doing. The risk was too great, but her faith in the treatment and the power of love drove her forward. Clara needed to live, no matter the cost. Henry could no longer ignore the signs. Clara was recovering at an incredible rate. The rare disease that should have consumed her was, miraculously, retreating. She, who at 3 months seemed fragile and powerless, now showed a genuine smile, and her eyes shone like never before. But the discomfort Henry felt inside him didn't lessen. He needed answers. In the past few days, he had become more attentive to Gabriela's movements. One night, he followed her again to Clara's room, silently. He saw the nanny gently caress his daughter's forehead, once again whispering words he couldn't understand. This time, something seemed different. It wasn't just a normal gesture. There was determination in Gabriela's actions, a concentration almost mystical. That's when doubt transformed into an irresistible question: what is she doing with Clara? The next day, he sought her out. The fear that something was wrong made Henry's voice tremble when he confronted her. "Gabriela, I need to know what's going on. Clara is improving in an inexplicable way. You did something without my permission, didn't you?" Gabriela, surprised by Henry's tone of voice, hesitated for a moment. She knew she couldn't hide the truth any longer. She looked at him with a heavy gaze, as if she were preparing to reveal something that would change everything. She replied with painful sincerity, "Mr. West, I did something to try to save Clara. An experimental treatment I thought could help, but I didn't want to worry you. I just wanted her to have a chance." Henry fell silent, the word chance echoing in his mind. He didn't know how to feel. On one hand, the idea that Gabriela had made a decision without his authorization enraged him, but on the other hand, he couldn't ignore the results. Clara was alive, and getting healthier by the day. Henry felt a mix of gratitude and anger, but what bothered him the most was the weight of the decision she had made on her own. "You risked everything, Gabriela," he said, his voice hoarse. "You shouldn't have done this without my permission." But he paused, trying to control his emotions. "But now I see what you did. And I can't ignore that. Maybe it was the only way to save my daughter." In the days that followed, Henry struggled to accept what Gabriela had told him. He spent sleepless nights reflecting on the events. There was something in her words that touched him deeply. She had done it out of love, out of an uncontrollable instinct to protect Clara. It was something he, as a father, understood. But he couldn't shake the internal conflict he felt. Gabriela had gone too far, crossing the boundaries of what he considered acceptable. But something incredible was happening. Clara, who should have passed away weeks ago, was more alive than ever. She smiled, played, and her growth seemed normal. When he saw her crawl for the first time, Henry had an uncontrollable urge to cry. He knew there was something supernatural about his daughter's recovery, but he still didn't understand what was happening. Clara's cure seemed like a miracle. He tried to convince himself it was just a coincidence, but every new day, she showed signs of growth and health that defied all logic. Henry decided to take Clara to other doctors, specialists who might explain the unexplainable. With each exam, the results were the same. Clara was improving. They couldn't explain why this was happening, but Clara was alive and well. Henry was astonished. He knew something was wrong with what was happening, but he couldn't ignore the fact that his daughter was out of danger. One night, he entered Clara's room, where Gabriela was gently caressing the girl. He watched, unseen, and for the first time, he realized she had done something even more extraordinary than he had imagined. Gabriela was using something that looked like a liquid solution, applying it delicately to Clara's skin. Henry felt a chill as he realized this was part of the treatment she had secretly administered. He stood still watching, and deep down, he knew that somehow, Clara was cured because of Gabriela's bold actions. But this also brought an enormous weight. How could he, Henry, a man who had always controlled everything in his life, accept that his daughter's fate had been altered by such a risky, unauthorized decision? Henry could no longer deal with the truth. Clara's cure, though undeniable, was becoming increasingly difficult for him to process. What Gabriela had done, the risk she had taken in secret, was something he could never have authorized. But at the same time, he couldn't deny the gratitude he felt for her. Clara was alive and healthy, and that, in the end, was the only thing that truly mattered. It was on a cloudy afternoon, while he was in his office, that the decision to confront Gabriela became inevitable. He could no longer live with the doubt, with the feeling that something more, something deep and dangerous, was happening. He needed to understand the true extent of what she had done. Henry found Gabriela in the living room, where she was organizing some of Clara's toys. He called her over and asked her to sit down. "Gabriela, we need to talk," he said, his voice tense. "I know what you did, and I don't know what to think. You told me you used an experimental treatment. But there's more, isn't there? What exactly did you do to Clara?" Gabriela looked at him with an unshakable calmness, but her eyes betrayed a deep sadness. She knew this moment would come, but she didn't know how Henry would react. "I knew you'd find out, Mr. West," she said softly. "I made a decision, and I know it wasn't the right thing to do, but I couldn't just sit back and wait. Clara was dying." Henry stared at her, feeling a lump form in his throat. "But what did you do, Gabriela? What exactly did you do to my daughter?" She sighed, her eyes closing for a moment, as if she were preparing to say something that would change everything. "I found a treatment, an experimental cure. A substance that altered Clara's genetic structure. I applied it secretly, believing it was her only chance. I know I went too far, that I shouldn't have made that decision without your permission, but she's your daughter, and I couldn't lose the chance to save her life." Henry was silent, absorbing her words. What Gabriela was saying was hard to swallow, but the results were right there, in front of his eyes. Clara was alive. Clara was well. All he could do now was process the pain of how much he didn't know, how much had been left out. He looked at Gabriela and for the first time understood what she had done. "You risked everything," he said, his voice broken. "You risked your life, your career. And most of all, you risked my trust. But, at the same time, you saved my daughter. And I don't know how to react to that. Part of me feels anger, but the other part is eternally grateful." The following days were filled with an indescribable tension. Henry couldn't understand the mixture of emotions that consumed him. On one hand, he knew that Clara was alive and well, and that was undoubtedly the most important thing. But on the other hand, he felt a sense of betrayal, that his authority, his position as a father and protector, had been disrespected. He called Gabriela once more. This time, the confrontation would not be calm. He needed to vent. He needed to understand once and for all why she had acted the way she did. Gabriela entered his office, appearing more at ease than he felt. She knew he was preparing for a difficult conversation, but she didn't know how intense it would be. When she sat down before him, Henry didn't hesitate. "Gabriela, I need answers. Why didn't you tell me the truth? You knew I would never have allowed what you did. I'm not saying Clara isn't better, but how could you do this without my permission?" Gabriela lowered her eyes, ashamed. "I know I was wrong, Mr. West. I know I shouldn't have made that decision alone. But every night when I saw Clara fighting, I knew something had to be done. I couldn't let her die without trying something for her. I didn't want to miss the chance to save her life, no matter what it meant going against everything you believed in." Henry closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of those words. He took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. "You don't understand, Gabriela. As a father, I should have been in control. I should have been responsible for this decision. You took that from me. But, on the other hand..." He looked at her, his face softened by pain and understanding. "You gave me Clara back. And in the end, that's what matters the most." The tension between them seemed to dissipate, but there was still a deep sense of guilt and relief. Gabriela knew their relationship would change forever, but what mattered now was the future. Clara was alive, and the love between them, although marked by a difficult decision, would bring them even closer. Henry couldn't sleep. He spent his nights watching Clara, who was now completely healthy, smiling and playing with the toys scattered around her. His daughter's happiness seemed so distant from the anguish he had felt a few months ago, when he thought he was going to lose her. But even with the joy of seeing Clara recovered, he couldn't shake the conflicting emotions that overwhelmed him. He owed Gabriela. She had made a risky decision without consulting him, but what he couldn't deny was that she had given his daughter the chance to live. He never imagined that the cure for Clara would come from an experimental, unproven treatment. Gabriela herself, by acting without permission, had broken a line of trust. But at the same time, he felt immense gratitude. Without her, he would have lost his daughter. Henry sat beside Gabriela one calm evening, with Clara asleep in her crib. He could no longer carry the weight in his heart. "Gabriela," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I know you did something without my permission, and that was difficult for me. I don't understand everything you did, but now I understand that you did it out of love. You saved my daughter, and I will never be able to thank you enough." Gabriela looked at him, and her eyes shone with understanding. She knew he didn't have easy words. "Mr. West, I acted with my heart. I never wanted to disrespect your authority. I just wanted to save Clara's life. I didn't know what else to do. I knew you loved her, but I felt that I needed to take control of something that was beyond our reach." Henry sighed deeply. "I understand now. I was so obsessed with control, with the fear of losing my daughter, that I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. You were the key to saving Clara, and for that, I owe you more than words can express." The forgiveness between them was silent but profound. For the first time, Henry felt a sense of inner peace. He knew he could trust Gabriela, that she was an essential part of his daughter's life. The love she had shown for Clara had overflowed, and now he saw her no longer as just a nanny, but as a true guardian of his daughter. Henry, Clara, and Gabriela's lives now followed a new perspective. Clara's miraculous recovery was not just a matter of health, but an emotional journey that had changed everyone involved. Henry and Gabriela had grown closer, but more importantly, he had learned the true value of trust and forgiveness. On a peaceful afternoon, as the sun set over the mansion, Henry watched Clara play in the garden. He saw her smile, running with her little bare feet through the cool grass, and he couldn't help but remember what he almost lost. The fear of not seeing his daughter grow up had dissipated, but the lesson he had learned would never leave him. Clara, at only a few months old, had taught him about the value of life and how much it should be cherished. Henry turned to Gabriela, who was beside him, watching Clara with a serene smile. "Gabriela," he said with a firm voice filled with conviction, "I promise from now on, I'll never forget what truly matters. I promise I will be present, that I will care for Clara with all the love and dedication she deserves. You won't be alone anymore. I will make sure our family stays united and strong forever." Gabriela looked at him, her eyes full of gratitude. She didn't need more words. Henry's promise was all she needed to hear. They had weathered a storm together, and now they were ready to move forward, their hearts filled with hope. Henry crouched down, picked up Clara in his arms, and held her against his chest, feeling her warmth. "You're going to grow strong, my girl. I promise I'll never let you go." And with that, the cycle of pain and regret was closed, giving way to a new journey, where love and trust would govern their lives from that moment on. And so, Clara's destiny was changed forever, but the price everyone paid for this second chance was immeasurable. Henry, though his heart was torn between anger and gratitude, would never see his daughter's life the same way again. Gabriela's sacrifice, the broken trust, and the bonds of love that emerged from the storm. All of it teaches us an important lesson. Sometimes, the greatest proof of love is doing the unthinkable, even if the world doesn't understand. But what would you do if you were in Gabriela's place? And if you were Henry, how would you react? This story leads us to question what we are willing to do for those we love. The answer could change everything. If you were moved by this story and want to see more touching stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and share with your friends. Every gesture you make makes all the difference. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. We have many more impactful stories waiting for you, with twists that will keep you hooked until the very last second. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where we'll reveal more stories that touch the heart and transform lives.